Now to a story making headlines everywhere. The cover of the New York Daily News pretty much sums up the debate. Are members of the GOP trying to sabotage a deal between President Obama and leaders in Iran? The Daily News calls those 47 senators who wrote that letter traitors. Iran is now responding to a letter from 47 Republican senators who wrote directly to those leaders in an effort to warn them that a possible nuclear deal with Tehran and Washington wouldn't last. Another battle is brewing between the White House and Congress. 47 senators sent a letter to the leaders of Iran weighing in on the nuclear deal the Obama administration is negotiating. It states, "You may not fully understand our constitutional system. We will consider any agreement regarding your nuclear weapons program that is not approved by the Congress as nothing more than an executive agreement between President Obama and Ayatollah Khomeini." The White House is firing back, calling the letter reckless and accusing Republicans of violating long-standing rules of diplomacy.
I think it's somewhat ironic to see some members of Congress wanting to make common cause with the hardliners in Iran.
In a fiery statement last night, Vice President Biden called the Republicans' message misleading and said it's not only false, it's dangerous. Even Iran's foreign minister weighed in, tweeting, quote, "It seems that the authors not only do not understand international law, but are not fully cognizant of the nuances of their own constitution when it comes to the presidential powers in the conduct of foreign policy." But the primary author of the letter told ABC News' John Carl that Republicans will have the final say on any agreement.
We're simply trying to say that Congress has a constitutional role to approve any deal to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
Some legal scholars say the Republican senators may have broken a centuries-old law that prohibits U.S. citizens from corresponding with foreign governments if that correspondence meddles in American foreign affairs. But it's highly unlikely they would be punished. Now, earlier today, I spoke with freshman Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, who not only represents New York's 1st District in Suffolk County, but is also a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We talked about the controversy surrounding the letter and whether he believes his constituent or whether he believes those senators were out of line. Congressman, let's start with the Iran letter. If those 47 senators had come to you and said, boy, as the only Jewish Republican in Congress, we'd love for you to sign off on this letter to the Iranian government, would you have signed?
Well, I would be signing regardless of whether I was Jewish or not. The fact of the matter is that any deal with Iran should come to Congress for approval. It should come to the American public. There's a great concern, regardless of whether you are Jewish or not Jewish. There's a great concern of entering into a bad deal with Iran, and there's an understanding that a bad deal could be worse than no deal at all.
Putting the issue aside, the policy decision aside, there's the old saying that politics stops at the water's edge. Doesn't the U.S. need to speak with one voice on foreign policy, and shouldn't that voice be the president's and not Congress's?
Well, if the president is entertaining a deal that will allow Iran to pursue uranium enrichment or maintain their centrifuges, to block weapons inspectors, if the president is negotiating a deal where America is making permanent concessions on our side in exchange for temporary concessions on the part of Iran, if the president is looking to enter into a deal that triggers any type of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, well, I think that it would be in America's best interest to go in a different direction. So I think that America should always be speaking in one voice when that one voice is in the best interest of America, and a bad deal with Iran is not.
But when you say in the best deal of America, that's really your opinion on this, and you're injecting your opinion into that one voice that's representing the United States. Let me reverse the situation. If it was a President Scott Walker or a President Jeb Bush and Democratic senators wrote a similar letter, you'd be okay with that?
I would be signing on to that Democrat letter to the president if a Republican president wanted to enter into a bad deal with Iran that would do any of what I just outlined. It doesn't matter whether you are Republican or Democrat. This is something that should transcend partisan politics when we're talking about the security of America and our allies. And we do need a reminder, it seems like, this day and age as to who our friends are and who our enemies are. And if the president needs a member of Congress or members of Congress to remind him of that, now's a good time for that to happen.
You said America needs to have a consistent foreign policy. How is that possible when members of Congress are writing letters to foreign governments basically reversing the position that the administration is trying to deal with with whatever the foreign policy situation happens to be, whether it's Iran or Great Britain or Egypt or anybody else in the world? How is that consistent?
If the president wants to enter into a good deal with Iran, I think he would see very strong, overwhelming bipartisan support. The concern is that we would enter into a bad deal with Iran that would be worse than having no deal at all. And as far as consistency goes, if the president in Syria, for example, he warned the Syrian government that there were going to be consequences for the use of weapons a couple years ago, that once used, there were no consequences. A president, regardless of whether it is a hawk or a dove, whether it is a liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, needs to be consistent as far as leadership goes.
It's our current intelligence that says that Iran is developing these centrifuges and nuclear capabilities. Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress and said his intelligence says that Iran is 1 year away. Here's what I'm not clear on, Congressman. Wouldn't a deal give us more intelligence on site through inspections and a first-hand view if Iran begins a buildup? I mean, we would have the intelligence capabilities we have now to see what Iran is doing, but we would also be on site and be able to see with our own eyes.
Yeah, well, that is making some assumptions, and it's okay to make assumptions. It's tough to assume that Iran is negotiating in good faith. Something else I wouldn't want to see happen is for the Obama administration to be announcing a deal, and then within hours or days or weeks, the Iranian government is refuting the terms of that deal, which essentially means that there was no deal in the first place. So just because there is something that the President of the United States of America wants to call a deal with Iran, that doesn't make it a good deal.
But we would still have the intelligence, even if Iran lies about everything after we sign a deal, we would still have the intelligence and the insight into what Iran's doing that we currently have. So why not pursue a deal and possibly get more insight and more information as to what they're doing?
Listen, if you want to have the position that a bad deal can be worse than no deal at all, that's perfectly okay. And if there are people in the American public who prefer a bad deal over no deal at all, that is their prerogative. As for me, I do not believe that a bad deal is worse than no deal at all. And for anyone else to support the concept of, by calling something a deal, that is better than nothing at all, regardless of what the deal says, is just ludicrous.
But we would, of course, reserve the right to resume sanctions or go with a military strike or whatever the case may be. But again, my question that I'm just not sure about, Congressman, if we work some sort of deal out with Iran, wouldn't we know exactly what we know about Iran's nuclear program right at this moment or more, as opposed to knowing less?
Okay, so you're assuming that there's a deal where Iran is to tell us that.
Or where we have inspectors in place to see for ourselves.
You're assuming that we're entering into a deal that Iran is going to allow weapons inspectors to come in and verify all of these assumptions.
But even if Iran doesn't cooperate with inspections, even if we don't get on-site verification, we would still know exactly what we know right now, wouldn't we?
So again, if you enter into a bad deal, or if you enter into no deal at all, in both cases, you are in a very similar situation as far as having access for weapons inspectors and to verify intelligence. That is but one aspect of these negotiations.
All right, Congressman Lee Zeldin, it's an important debate to have, and I thank you for engaging in it with me tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
As you may have gathered, that was edited for time. The Congressman and I went back and forth on those topics several times. You can catch the complete interview that I did with Congressman Lee Zeldin. It's available online. Just go to our YouTube page. Dominic, the old saying that politics stops at the water's edge, I feel like we've entered an era where it does, but only if the president agrees with me.
You know, I know we're in television right now. You know what I really want to say? Nah, that doesn't apply anymore. We have.
I feel like that's where we are.
We have new foreign policy, and there are new rules of diplomacy, and the congressman clearly from the interview is between a rock and a hard place. He's not going to attack fellow Republicans, even though they are completely undermining the President of the United States. And so you guys were critical of me, but this is why I did not want Mr. Obama to go forward with immigration. Because when he did immigration without the support of Congress, that was basically a declaration of war.
Oh, that declaration hadn't been signed on both parties.
But
way
McConnell
earlier.
and Boehner were brand new, and they were playing with their best rules, I guess. But now the gloves are off, and they're completely undermining the president.
That is dangerous on foreign policy. That is dangerous when you get Congress undermining the president or even giving a different view of what they want the foreign policy to be. Let me ask you the question that I asked the congressman multiple times. Okay.
Do I get the duck like the congressman did?
He was kind enough to do the interview.
Okay.
But we know that Iran is developing these nuclear capabilities. Right. Israel knows that they're developing these capabilities. If we strike a deal, we get even more insight. And if they cheat the deal, we'll know. Won't we? What am I not getting in all this? That the sanctions are lifted and that's
if you believe the Obama White House, then that's exactly the case. That we'll know more information. The people that are experts at reading this type of situation will be able to go in and engage the situation. But what this all amounts to, Andrew, and you well know this is called Politics 101. Yep. Obama was a lame duck, and it appeared that way. And then all of a sudden he woke up one day and said, no, I'm not going out without a fight. And he did immigration, he did Cuba. And he said, listen, either you're with me or I'm going at it alone. And so, but there's a consequence to going at it alone. And this Congress is saying, you can do that, Mr. President, but we're gonna undermine you. We've got the power. We're gonna undermine you every chance we get.
That's the kind of insight and analysis you only get from Dominic Carter. Dominic, thank you for tonight. Appreciate it. All right, up next, an alleged victim of campus sexual assault speaks to RFL. Why she's suing one institution in a call for change. We're going to highlight her story next.